I would like to welcome you to a guided chess strategy lesson, personally for you, where you will learn how to play close positions, how to find a plan in a close position, and how to attack opponents' pawn chains. It all starts with the idea of a pawn break. Remember that in a close position, almost always your plan is going to be connected to achieving a pawn break. So what is that? It's a pawn move which will allow you to trade your own pawn for opponents or offer such trade. The idea behind it is that as pawns are leaving the board, as they're exchanging, you're going to be opening lanes, diagonals, and files, and that is benefiting the side that has better pieces or more pieces on that side of the board, or if your opponent's king is there as you're exposing it. So an example of a pawn break would be a pawn move b3. If I play this move, if I choose to, inevitably there's going to be a pawn trade happening. Or on the other side of the board, I could play f4, f5 later, right? And I am attacking an opponent's pawn which is stuck. That's the point, that they cannot pass. And so I would be benefiting from that if my opponent's king is weak there and I'm trying to attack it, or if I had more active pieces on that side of the board. So which pawn break are you going for? Well, a lot of times it is going to be connected to where you have space. And here we have the pawn on e5 while their pawn is on e6. So we would say they have more space on that side of the board. That allows you to bring more pieces to the right side of the board. And thus, opening up the position will benefit you. If you follow the right strategic path, tactics will appear to your favor. You will get all of those keyword spins, etc. So now that we know that we should play on the king side, we can start looking for a pawn break. And here I recommend imagining that there are no pieces on the board. You could perhaps think about the kings, but then only imagine that pawns are there. You will find it easier to find the right pawn break because it's hard to consider moving the pawns up when pieces are in front of them. Like, it is difficult for you to imagine f4, f5. Notice too also that g3 would be a pawn break and it would allow opponent to exchange the pawn, but we do not like it because A, you would then open up the rook, and B, of course, this pawn on h3 is not protected. However, if we were to achieve f4, f5, and our pieces would be ready to support that, we hope to open up the opponent's king and that side of the board where our pieces will flourish and will get tactical opportunities. So in our game, white played the move knight h2 in order to open up the pawn march forward. Our opponent played b5, and remember, they have similar plans somewhere else on the board typically. So a pawn break that they will be playing for is going to be b4, which is then going to open up the position for them on the queen side, where they hope to move their pieces and capitalize on whatever was open there. Attack weak squares, weak pawns, and if we had a king on that side of the board, they will be hunting down that too as well. So white played queen to g4. I love this move a lot. It will not only prepare the move f5, it is also very annoyingly placed in the king side where we're extraying a lot of vulnerable points in our opponent's position. Queen d7 was played. Here white took on b5. We have a trade after which black was unable to take back with the queen and keep the open lane. Now they took with the knight. Finally, white goes f4. Black opens up the a lane for themselves. Knight e3. Take a look that we're in no rush. We're setting the pieces to positions to support that pawn break. In close positions, a lot has to do also with the maneuvering of the pieces so that the pawn break that you're achieving would, first of all, be achieved by itself, but also that you would have subsequently an attack with those developed pieces. So black will go for b4, and we very beautifully attack on the other side of the board. And what we have is mutual attacks happening on different sides of the board. Black is trying to put pressure on the queen side, and white is trying to build up their army on the right side of the board. And over here, we're going to stop. White is already developing the attack on the right side of the board. If we were to turn on computers, computers will say white is winning. You have to just see for yourselves how we managed to move already 4 pieces, and the rook can come any moment into the heart of opponent's position on the right, while black is failing with the same type of attack on the queen side. And thus white did very well in this game. Black defended with bishop f8. Then we had this pawn absolutely dropping. White is already material up. And then with the move knight to g5, we have too many threats with this army on that side of the board. For example, we can take here, and the knight is hanging, and black very soon lost the game and resigned. All right, now let's try to apply what we have learned in the other position. Perhaps I'm going to make it easier for you, and I will let you pause the video and think, where should white be playing over here? And maybe you can even identify the pawn break that we should be aiming for. All right, so once again, we're looking for a pawn break, and we look for where we have more space. So that's going to be the queen side. We can bring more pieces there, thus that's where we want to open up the position and create weaknesses in opponent's position. So the pawn break is b5. Now, if I told you what should black be playing for, maybe you can pause the video and think about that too. So black's pawn breaks on the right side would be g5, g4, or the f pawn, because the g pawn is much more easier to prepare. That's why black, perhaps in the game, is going to go for g5, g4, rather for this f5, f4, which requires the knight to move backwards. It's slower, so for black, we would really recommend this one to be played in the game. Black played queen to e6. We have now, instead of taking on c6, and he saw that black is going to be able to bring the rook to b8 and take over the lane, white saw an opportunity to move this pawn all the way to a6, after which there will be even more lanes opened, and we're going to attack the base of the pawn chain, the weakest point in the pawn chain. a5, black is going for their own counterplay connected to g4, and now we have a6. So we have already threats on the queen side that black has to react to. In the game, black played b takes a6, and we're not interested in taking ourselves on a6, as that would lead to the same scenario where we have only b lane open, and black's rook can then later come to the b lane and win over or conquest the b file. Instead, we're taking the other way, and now not only have an open b lane, but we also have a semi-open a lane, where we have two weak pawns in opponent's position that we could base our attack against. So we have rook takes c6, and long term, it's going to be very easy for us to be attacking the a pawns. Now it's all about stopping the black's counterplay on the right side of the board, and it's actually not that easy to say whether we should be taking over here or playing the move h4. So I'm going to give you a moment to think, how would you defend here the right side of the board or the king side for white? It seems like h4 would be closing down the position, but then black has a very strong move, also attacking the base in our pawn chain. And after the base collapses, for example, let's say you take on g3, now the e3 and g3 pawns are both weak. Black would follow this up with bishop h6, attacking the e3 pawn, as well as bringing the knight to this weak square, and you could see that black has chances for an attack. Even the rook of black's hopefully can be brought by black to the g lane, and then I like the black chances for conducting a kingside attack over here. Instead, the right move for white is to be capturing over here, which creates an open h lane, and then playing g3, lifting the king to g2, and then moving ourselves the rook to h1, ensuring that we don't have any trouble along the h lane. The fact that we have a weak square over here doesn't bother us, because the black's queen can never land there thanks to our bishop. If the knight lands there, it will only be powerful if combined with the rook on the h lane, which is not going to happen, as we're going to be placing a rook on the h lane ourselves. Later in the game, white managed to attack the a pawns and win those pawns, and went on to win the games, as black failed to create anything here on the right side of the board. One more example. Take a look at this position. Think, what is the black's plan in this middle game? All right, so here we have a very interesting situation. On the right side of the board, it seems that this pawn of white's is more advanced than our d pawn, which refers to the queen side. On the other hand, our b pawn is a little bit more advanced on b3. If you look this in a discerning way into this position, you will notice that white can pretty much only play on the queen side. The rooks can come to the C lane. That's where their bishops are. And so it's very hard to conquest and challenge white on the queen side, as they have most of their army over there. On the other hand, on the king side, we have space advantage thanks to the pawn on e4, which squeezes white's pieces and not allow them to place them to defend the white's king. Actually, this side of the board is completely cleared and the white's king is lacking protection. All right, this is giving us conditions to successfully achieve a kingside attack. The pawn break that we have in mind is going to be f5, f4. Thanks to the center being closed in nature and us dominating the king side, that has no consequences for our king. So black goes f5. White played rook e1 in the game. And now we have a very beautiful move by black, rook e6, which combines both offense, a rook lift, with defense, protecting this d6 pawn and allow our queen to come to the kingside attack right now. We had bishop b2. We are hoping as white that we can now achieve a4, a pawn break, to open up the queen side and develop some play as white over there. However, black, of course, is ready to play pawn to b4 and close it down. We're not interested in opening up that side of the board and helping white, as we're going to be attacking on the other side of the board. So we have queen g5 by black, a4, f4, counterplay. If they were to take, game is going to finish very, very quickly. In this position, we have this threat over here, as well as a check, and picks up the queen. So white in the game decided to go bishop f1, f3, threatening to take over here. White closed down the position with g3, and now that we no longer have as initiative move as before with this f4, f3, we took time to close down the queen side where our opponent wanted to attack us. Here, the black's threats are to continue open up the queen side, double up with queen and rook, and use the g and the h pawns to open up the lanes on the g and h. Here we have h4, and over here black played queen to h5. The pawn break now to open up the lanes next to white's king is g5. We have rook c1, pawn to g5, and here the game soon was over. Black was able to break through and find the winning attack against the white's king. If you're enjoying this lesson, consider hiring me as your personal online chess coach. And thank you all for watching this, and I will see you in the next video lesson. Bye bye.